The sky over Mars burned red as alarms screamed through the colony at Outpost 9. Commander Elias Grant stood in the tall command tower, staring at the heavens as something huge and glowing tore through the upper atmosphere, falling fast. It wasn't a ship, not one they knew. It wasn't a meteor either. It looked alive, shimmering, spinning, moving like it chose its own path. Systems across the outpost shut down without warning. The lights flickered. Power lines sparked. Screens flashed. White and died. Gravity itself felt wrong for a second, like the air became too heavy to breathe. Then came silence, and after that, the crash. A great rumble shook the ground as the strange object slammed into the surface, throwing up dust and flames at the edge of Sector 4. The earth cracked. Blue light pulsed out from the crater. Troops rushed in, guns raised, armored suits hissing as they formed a perimeter. Drones scanned the sky and the pit below. Everyone expected a monster. Some expected nothing at all. What came out was worse, or better. No one could tell yet. A figure stepped out of the smoke. She wasn't wearing a helmet. She wasn't wearing armor. She didn't even seem to be breathing. Her skin shimmered. Like light on water, pale and smooth, her long silver hair floated behind her like it wasn't tied to gravity. Her eyes glowed with calm blue fire, and they locked onto Elias. She walked with quiet strength. Not fast, not slow. She wasn't afraid of the soldiers or the guns. Elias held his breath. Something about her felt familiar, but impossible. She stopped a few steps from him, and her voice didn't come through her lips. It came straight into his head, like a... I thought he didn't think himself. Her words were soft, but they carried weight like a secret held for too long. She said, "I found you." Then with a gentle smile, she added, "Husband?" Elias froze. The soldiers looked confused, then tense. One moved to raise his gun, but Elias held out his hand. "Don't fire," he ordered sharply. His eyes never left her. His voice was steady, but his heart beat like a war drum. She looked so sure of what she said, like she truly believed it, like she had waited years, maybe centuries to say it. But Elias had never seen her before, never met her, never heard her name. Yet a part of him buried deep under layers of memory, stirred like something long lost had just been found. The air grew heavy again, and a low hum filled the sky. Elias looked up, eyes narrowing as he saw the clouds swirl unnaturally. The woman turned her head slightly, her expression darkening. The sky cracked open with a sharp blast of light as new shapes appeared in orbit. Ships, massive, black, dagger-like, glowing with green light, descended fast and wide. It was a fleet, unlike any human design. They came with purpose, and they came with power. Elias didn't need scanners to know who they were, he'd read. The reports seen the old war files. These were Zarquan warships, alien hunters thought to be extinct for over 100 years. They were a nightmare from history, brutal, cunning, and cruel. The last time they came, Earth almost fell. They had vanished since then, but now they were back. And they had followed her. A deep fear spread across the base. Sirens wailed again. Emergency lights turned red. Officers shouted orders, calling for lockdown, scramble fighters, activate orbital defense. The ground shook with the sound of defense. Turrets rising, drones shot into the air. Elias never took his eyes off the woman. Her name, if she had given one, was still unknown. She didn't look scared. She looked ... sad, like she had hoped to arrive quietly, but knew this would happen. She looked at Elias again, her voice soft inside his head. "I didn't mean to lead them here," she said. "But I couldn't stay away. I had to find you." Elias stepped closer, just one step. "Why me?" he asked. "Who are you?" But she only said, "You'll remember, in time." And then the first shot was fired from orbit. A green beam sliced the sky. The war had come, and Elias didn't know it yet, but this strange woman, the one who called herself his wife, was the key to saving all of humanity. ChatGPT said. The room shook as the first blasts hit the upper atmosphere. And Elias Grant stared at the sky, trying to make sense of what was happening. The strange woman who had stepped out of the crater Saria. She had called herself that now stood calmly while the entire outpost prepared for war. Soldiers shouted orders. Drones flew out like insects. Plasma cannons powered up and locked onto the alien fleet above. But Soraya showed no fear. She simply stood near Elias, her silver hair drifting slowly in the still air. Her glowing eyes watching the sky as if she had seen this moment before. Elias pulled her into the command tower, demanding answers. She looked at him quietly, like someone seeing a lost memory, then spoke again, not with her lips, but directly into his thoughts. She told him things he could hardly understand. She came from far beyond known space, from a place where time bent and reality folded in ways human minds could barely handle. She said she crossed the stars through forbidden paths, using powers that were almost lost to her kind. All of it, she said, to find him. Not just Elias now, but Elias from a time long before his own memory. A man who had once stood beside her, loved her, fought with her, and died for her. A man who had been reborn as the commander, now standing before her, confused and angry. Elias thought she was insane until she reached out and touched his hand. The second her fingers brushed his skin, a vision rushed into his mind so fast it knocked the breath from his lungs. He saw himself standing on a different world, under a violet sky. He wore armor not made by human hands. He held Soraya close, whispering her name before walking into a battle that he knew he would not survive. Then it was gone, and he was back in the tower, gasping, shaking. She looked at him with soft eyes. "I told you," she said. "You're him. You've always been him." Elias pulled away, still unsure if it was real or some kind of psychic trick, but deep down, something had changed. Something felt true, even if his brain refused to accept it. Then she told him why she was truly here. The Zarquan Armada, the monstrous fleet in the sky, wasn't just hunting humans anymore. They were hunting her. And Elias too, now that he was near her. She explained the ancient prophecy passed down by her people that one day a union between her kind and a human would give birth to something powerful, someone who would end the Zarquan's control over the stars. The prophecy called them the Starbound bloodline, and she believed their child would be that future. Elias didn't care about prophecies, cared about the present hand right now. Mars was under attack, and people were going to die, he ordered. Full evacuation protocols, and demanded Earth Command send reinforcements. But the response from Earth was cold. They didn't trust Soraya. They said she was dangerous, possibly the cause of the attack. And until they could be sure, Elias was to detain her and retreat. Elias slammed his fist into the console. The politicians were always slow, always cautious. They didn't understand the threat already standing in orbit above their heads. Soraya didn't argue, just looked at Elias and said, "If you want to survive, I can help you." He looked at her for a long time before nodding. He handed her a combat badge and gave her full access to the ship's systems. She moved fast, reaching the central control panel. Her fingers glowed faintly as she touched it, and the screens all lit up at once, showing paths around enemy ships and weaknesses in their shields that the computers hadn't detected. She wasn't guessing. She knew how they fought. Within minutes, Elias and his team launched into orbit aboard the Titan's Vow, the most advanced warship Mars had. Soraya stood beside him on the bridge, her hands folded behind her back, staring at the approaching alien fleet. Elias gave the order to engage. Human fighters swarmed into space like a wall of metal bees. The Zarquan responded with brutal precision, their ships darting through formations, their plasma slicing through holes. But Soraya raised her hand, and the Titan's Vow surged with strange new power. Lasers pierced alien shields. Engines ran faster. Weapons hit harder. No one understood how, but she made them stronger. And with every passing minute, Elias began to believe her more. She wasn't just some mysterious visitor. She was a warrior. And she had come for him not to destroy, but to protect. The battle wasn't won yet, but with her at his side, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. The war came hard and fast. Mars was burning, and the human colonies were scattered. Commander Elias Grant led the escape aboard the Titan's Vow, guiding a damaged fleet through space while the enemy followed close behind. The Zarquan ships hunted them like wolves, silent and sharp, slipping through the darkness with glowing green engines. The humans couldn't outfight them. Not in open space. Not with their numbers. They needed time. They needed a plan. Elias kept his eyes on the long-range scanners while Soraya stood beside him, her hands lightly touching the main console. She didn't speak much now. Her face looked distant, focused. Her body gave off a strange warmth, as if energy moved through her skin. Elias could see the crew watching her with nervous eyes. She looked too alien to trust, but too powerful to ignore. And she kept saving them, whenever the engine started. To fail, Soraya stepped forward and touched the controls. Systems that were dead came back to life. Shields strengthened. Communications cleared. It was like the ship listened to her. Elias didn't ask how she did it. He just let her. When they reached the edge of Earth-controlled space, they finally got a signal from Earth Command. The generals and politicians appeared on the screen, their faces pale and full of fear. The Zarquan were real. They admitted now. Too many colonies had gone silent in the past 2 weeks. Too many scouts had vanished. They thought it was pirates. Or accidents. But it wasn't. It was war. Still, the leaders didn't welcome Elias home with open arms. They didn't trust Soraya. Some called her a trick, a weapon planted by the enemy. Others wanted her tested, locked away, studied. Elias argued with them, trying to explain that she had saved Mars, that she had warned them. But they didn't. Want to hear it? The orders were clear: return to Earth and surrender Soraya for study. Elias turned off the screen without saying goodbye. He looked at Soraya. She didn't look surprised. They are afraid of what they don't understand, she said softly. That is how they fall. Elias knew she was right. Fear would break Earth faster than any enemy ship. So he made a new decision. He wouldn't go back to Earth. Not yet. He would find out where the Zarquan were building their power, and he would strike first. He asked Soraya if she could help him find the source. She closed her eyes, her fingers glowing faintly. She said one name: Lyser Prime. Lyser Prime was a moon far beyond the usual patrol lines, thought to be abandoned. But Soraya said the Zarquan had turned it into a Forge World, a place where they built ships, trained soldiers, and used enslaved life forms as fuel. Elias knew it was dangerous. The fleet was still damaged. They were outnumbered. But he also knew something else. If they waited too long, Earth would fall. So he gathered what ships he had left and set course for Lyser Prime. The journey through deep space was quiet, tense. Elias spent many hours alone on the bridge, watching stars drift past. Sometimes Soraya sat near him without speaking. There was comfort in her presence, even if her past still confused him. He didn't remember being her husband. Looked at her. He felt something in his chest, like a memory trapped in ice. He didn't speak of it. Neither did she. When they reached Lyser Prime, the truth was worse than they feared. The moon glowed with green flame. Towers rose like claws into the sky. The planet below crawled with metal and shadow. Thousands of life forms were chained to machines, their energy being drained to build weapons. Elias felt sick. Soraya's face hardened. She whispered names of people she had once known. Her voice shook, and she looked at Elias and said, "Let's end it." The battle began before they even touched the ground. Zarquan defense towers opened fire as the human fleet descended. Fighters roared through the air. Titan's Vow led the charge, its cannons blazing. Soraya stood in the command center, guiding energy through the ship, making their attacks hit harder, their shields hold longer. Elias flew down in a dropship with a squad of Marines, leading the ground assault himself. The air was thick with smoke and fire. Moved fast, breaking through the outer wall and storming the control spire. Kaya appeared beside him without warning, blinking through a burst of energy. She moved like light, striking with blades of pure power, clearing a path through the enemy forces. They reached the forge core and planted charges. Soraya sent out a final pulse, unlocking the chains on the slaves below. Then they ran. The moon cracked as the explosions began. The towers fell. Flames rose. The Zarquan screamed through their cums. Elias and Soraya barely made it back to the ship before the moon's surface collapsed. They had lost half their fleet. Hundreds were dead. But Lyser Prime was Ganand with it. the Zarquan's biggest weapon factory. More importantly, they had stolen something, a data core from the enemy command center. Inside it were star charts, movement patterns, and the location of the Queen's world, the heart of the enemy. Elias looked at Soraya. Her energy was dimmer now, her shoulders tired, her eyes heavy. She had spent so much to protect them. He touched her hand. She looked at him and smiled. "Now you know where to go," she said. He nodded. "Let's finish this." ChatGPT said. The engines of the Titan's vow groaned as the fleet left the ruins of Lycer Prime behind, flying into the cold emptiness of deep space. Commander Elias Grant stood at the forward window of the bridge, watching stars drift past. In silence, around him, the crew moved with quiet urgency. They had just destroyed a massive enemy stronghold, but the victory felt hollow. Too many ships had been lost. Too many soldiers didn't make it back. And even now, Elias knew the war was far from over. The data core they had recovered from the Zarquan's Forge world was the only reason they kept going. It held the location of something vital, something dark and powerful. Soraya had confirmed it after scanning the information with her glowing fingertips. It was the Queen's world, the central hive, where the Zarquan Scire's control began. If they could destroy that, the enemy fleets might fall apart. Their command would break, their power would fade. Elias knew it was a suicide mission, but it was the only shot they had left. Earth couldn't hold much longer. The other colonies were crumbling. If they didn't strike now, humanity would be gone in months. As they made their way toward the enemy homeworld, the crew grew more tense. Everyone understood the risk. They were going into the heart of the Zarquan Empire, with a half-damaged fleet and a strange alien woman as their guide. But no one backed down, not after what they had seen her do. Soraya, though still silent most of the time, moved like someone carrying a heavy weight. Her powers were weaker now. Her skin no longer glowed like before. But she didn't complain. She stood beside Elias, watching the stars with him, her face calm and focused. Elias asked her once why she kept going, why she had crossed so far just for him. She looked at him and answered with a soft voice. "Because love remembers what time forgets," she said. "And because I believe in what we once were." And they reached the edge of the nether expanse. Everything changed. It was not like normal space. It twisted light and bent sound. The ships began to shake. Time slowed down and sped up at random. Systems failed for minutes, then restarted as if nothing happened. The crew started seeing things, memories from their pasts, dreams that felt too real. Elias himself saw a younger version of Soraya standing in the hallway outside his quarters, smiling like they had known each other forever. But when he blinked, she was gone. The expanse was a graveyard of lost vessels, broken ships floating. Aimlessly, some cracked in half, others turned inside out. They had no choice but to push through it. Soraya fused herself to the navigation system, her mind guiding them through the chaos. Without her, they would have been lost. They reached the other side and found the Queen's world. It was called Voroctal, a massive planet wrapped in storms and guarded by hundreds of Zarquan ships. Dark towers reached into space, pulsing with green light. The surface was covered with massive hive cities, each alive with movement, war, machines, and energy weapons. The fleet didn't wait. Elias gave the order, and the Titan's vow surged forward, leading the attack. Human fighters broke formation and dove toward the enemy lines. Plasma fire filled the air. The sky above the planet became a field of burning metal. Explosions painted the darkness with light. Every second was a struggle. Zarquan fought without fear, their ships weaving and striking like blades. But the humans held their ground. Soraya pushed herself harder, draining her remaining strength to boost their weapons, block enemy scanners, and open holes in enemy formations. Elias led a small task force toward the planet's surface. He piloted a gunship through the storm clouds, lightning striking around him. Behind him, squads of Marines followed in drop pods, their metal shells tearing through the atmosphere. Soraya sat behind him, breathing hard, her face pale. She was weakening fast. but she wouldn't stop. They landed near the Queen's tower, a giant black spire surrounded by thick walls and glowing green turrets. The air smelled like smoke and blood. Elias and his team charged forward, blasting their way through enemy guards. The Zarquan were strong, with sharp limbs and armor-like skin, but the humans were faster and more desperate. Every step they took was closer to ending the war. Inside the tower, they climbed twisted halls, metal stairs that groaned under their feet. Soraya moved ahead of them, her energy flaring just enough to open sealed doors and disable traps. At the top of the spire, they entered the throne chamber, and there she was, the Queen. Twice the size of any soldier, her body floated above the floor, her many arms wrapped in dark silk, her eyes burning with cruel intelligence. She looked at Soraya with pure hatred. "You should have died with your kind," she hissed. "You betrayed your blood for this?" Human Soraya stood firm, though her body trembled. "I chose love," she said, "and that made me stronger than you." The Queen screamed and attacked with a wave of psychic force that knocked the soldiers to the ground. Elias held on to Soraya as her body shook from the impact. The Queen's voice filled their heads, trying to break their minds. But Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out the pulse detonator. He had one shot to overload the spire's core. Soraya gave him one last look, then stepped forward, her body glowing again for the first time in days. She created a shield around Elias as he moved toward the center of the room. The Queen attacked her with everything, but Soraya held firm. Just long enough, Elias slammed the detonator into the core and fired. The explosion ripped through the tower as the Queen screamed one final time. Elias pulled Soraya close and activated the evac beacon. As the light swallowed them, he held her tight and whispered, "I remember you now." The light faded slowly as Elias opened his eyes, coughing through smoke and dust, his ears ringing from the explosion that had destroyed the Queen's tower. Round him, the walls were cracked, the floor shaking, pieces of the ceiling falling, like burning snow. He rolled over and saw Soraya beside him, unconscious, her silver hair darkened with ash, her body still glowing faintly but flickering like a dying flame. He pulled her into his arms, ignoring the pain in his ribs and legs, and activated the emergency evac beacon strapped to his chest. The signal pulsed into the air, a final call for rescue. Outside the broken tower, the planet's sky had turned into a storm of fire. Human warships clashed with the last wave of Zarquan defenders. The Queen's death had sent shockwaves across the enemy fleet. Some ships lost control, drifting and crashing into each other. Others began fleeing, their leaders gone, their purpose broken. But many still fought with rage, refusing to surrender. In orbit, the Titan's Vow led the surviving human fleet through the battle, firing broadside after broadside. Human fighters weaved between falling enemy vessels, dodging plasma blasts, and guiding crippled allies back to safety. Every ship left in the fleet had taken damage, but none turned away. They knew this was the final fight, down below as the spire continued to collapse. Elias was pulled into a rescue pod by 2 Marines who had tracked his beacon. Soraya was carried gently beside him. The medics worked quickly, checking for life signs, stabilizing her weak pulse with portable energy packs. Elias, half-conscious, ordered the pilot to return to orbit. As they rose through the flaming atmosphere, he stared at Soraya's face, pale and calm. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. He whispered her name again and again, hoping she could hear him. The pod docked with the Titan's Vow, which was battered and burning along the hull. On the bridge, the surviving officers saluted him as he limped in. The enemy was breaking apart. They had done it, had struck at the heart, and lived. Still, the cost was clear. Dozens of ships gone, thousands of lives lost. Elias stood in silence, his hands on the railing, as the view screen showed the Queen's world crumbling behind them. Explosions burst across the hive towers. Some areas had gone dark, others still glowing with wild energy. The human fleet formed. Up around the flagship, gathering what strength it had left to retreat. Victory was theirs, but it had come with a deep wound. Soraya was moved to the med bay. Machines worked to keep her alive, but her body had taken too much. Her energy was drained. Her voice didn't return. For 2 days, Elias sat beside her, barely sleeping. He remembered now bits and pieces of a life that felt like a dream. A battlefield with 3 moons. A kiss under a sky full of falling stars. A promise whispered across lifetimes. He had loved her once. He loved her still. Yeah, the war was fading, but this memory was rising in him like fire through old snow. On the 3rd day, Soraya opened her eyes. They were dimmer than before, but they still held that soft light, the light that had led her across the stars to find him. She smiled weakly and touched his face. Her hand was cold, but steady. "You came back," she whispered. "Even after everything." Elias leaned in close and held her hand. "She found me first," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I just followed the light." Later that day, Earth Command sent a transmission. The Queen's death had changed everything. Across the galaxy, the Zarquan were retreating. Their hive minds were collapsing without their central leader. Fought among themselves, others vanished into deep space. Human colonies were reporting victories. The war, after so many years of fear, was finally ending. The generals offered Elias medals, parades, honor. He refused most of it. His mind was still in the medbay. He told them Soraya was the reason they were still alive. He made them listen, for once they did. News spread of the alien woman, who had helped save humanity, of the commander who stood by her when the world doubted. People began to see her not as a threat, but as a symbol. The headlines called it a miracle. Some called it fate. When Soraya could walk again, she and Elias stood together at the viewing deck, watching stars drift silently by. The war had ended, but something deeper had started. A bond not made in one lifetime, but across many. Soraya rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her gently. No more battles, no more running, just the stars and the promise of peace. As they stood there in silence, the crew of the Titan's Vow passed behind them quietly, giving them space, giving them respect. Elias closed his eyes and breathed deep. For the first time in years, the air didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like hope. And love that had survived time itself. The galaxy had fallen quiet, but the silence didn't last long. Though the Queen was dead and many of the Zarquan ships had scattered or collapsed into chaos, there were still pockets of resistance. Rogue commanders who refused to surrender, and sleeper fleets that had not yet received word of their Queen's death. One such fleet, larger than anything Elias had seen before, emerged from the far edges of deep space like a dark wave. They didn't send warnings or messages. They came with weapons hot, shields charged, and a single purpose to destroy the ship that had killed their queen. The Titan's Vow had become a symbol of human defiance and was now marked for death. The warning came just hours after Elias, and Soraya had begun to hope they could finally rest. The alarms screamed again, and the crew raced to stations. Elias stood on the bridge, calm but focused, watching the display light up with dozens in all, hundreds of enemy vessels. These weren't just random survivors. This was vengeance, controlled by the most dangerous of the Zarquan commanders, who had sworn to serve the Hive even beyond death. Elias looked to Soraya, who stood beside him, pale and tired but standing tall. Her energy had returned, not fully, but enough to fight one last time. She nodded at him, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "They don't understand," she said. "The Hive is broken. They are chasing a ghost." Elias nodded back. "Let's show them that ghost still bites." As the enemy closed in, the Titan's Vow powered up its remaining weapons. Many systems were still damaged from the battle on Voractyl, and the engineers worked quickly to patch what they could. Other ships in the fleet took position around the flagship, forming a wall of steel and fire. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. These were survivors, veterans, fighters who had seen death and pushed it back. When the first wave of Zarquan ships hit, the sky lit up in every direction. Plasma bursts, laser fire, missiles, and energy beams flew through the black, turning it into a storm of light and metal. Elias barked commands, moving from station to station, trusting his officers, keeping the line strong. Soraya stood at the ship's core, her hands glowing as she fed her strength into the damaged systems. She guided the ship's defenses, twisted the enemy's scanners, and sent false signals to confuse their formations. Her presence turned the tide of battle more than any weapon ever could. Still, the fight was brutal. Ship after ship fell, some torn apart by enemy fire, others ramming the enemy to take them down. Elias watched as the cruiser Dawnstrike took 3 enemy destroyers with it in a final charge. He saluted their bravery even as his heart sank. Every victory was a loss, every gain cost blood. Then the second wave came faster, heavier, more organized. Soraya stumbled, her hands trembling as she tried to keep the systems together. Elias caught her before she fell, helped her to a seat, and whispered, "You've done enough." But she shook her head. Not yet. They need one more push. She connected herself directly to the ship's neural core. It was dangerous, even deadly. But it gave her full control. The ship's weapons fired faster. Shields regenerated quicker. The enemy began to falter. The battle turned again. Elias saw the enemy command ship approaching. It was massive, shaped like a black crown, and surrounded by a glowing aura of energy. This was their new leader, the final loyalist, the last warbringer. Elias ordered all fire focused on it. The ship shook as it took damage. The bridge flashed red. Sparks flew. But they didn't stop. Soraya guided every missile, every beam. And finally, Elias saw the opening. He took the shot himself, pressing the button that launched the final torpedo straight into the enemy ship's core. It struck. The crown exploded in a burst of green flame. The enemy fleet paused. Then it broke apart. Some ships retreated. Others exploded from loss of command. The sky slowly cleared. The battle was over. The cost had been high. Half the fleet was gone. Hundreds more had died. And Sarasaria was fading. Her body glowed softly, flickering like a candle. She smiled at Elias, weakly. "It's done," she said. "They won't come back." Elias held her close, shaking his head. "Don't leave. We have peace now. We can finally live." She reached up and touched his cheek. "I've always lived," she whispered, "in every life where I found you." Her hand slipped away. Her body turned to light, and she was gone. Elias stood in silence, holding on to the warmth she left behind. The crew didn't speak. They watched as their commander closed his eyes and saluted the empty air. She had saved them all, one last time. And though she was gone, her memory would stay with him forever, burned into the stars, written in the hearts of every soul she had saved. After the last battle, the stars felt quiet, like they were mourning her too. The Titan's vow floated gently through space, wounded but still alive. Carrying the last of the fleet and the memory of the woman who had saved them all, Elias Grant stood alone on the bridge, staring out at the darkness, where distant lights blinked like old hopes trying to return. Around him, the crew worked silently, their movements slow and heavy, not because of damage, but because of loss. Soraya was gone. Her presence, once like warm energy humming through the ship, had vanished, and something in the ship itself felt colder now. Elias hadn't spoken much since the final shot that ended the last Zarquan fleet. He carried her memory like a weight strapped to his chest. Not just her death, but her life, her strength, her love, the strange and beautiful. Truth that she had crossed time and stars to find him again. And though she had said goodbye in light, she had never truly left him. He could feel it every time he touched the ship's walls, every time the systems hummed back to life without him asking. Every time he closed his eyes and saw her face smiling. Through memory, the fleet returned to Earth slowly, passing broken worlds and quiet stations. Messages came in from colonies and outposts across human space. The Zarquan were gone. Their hives crumbled. Their ships either fled to the edge of the galaxy or turned to dust without leadership. Peace wasn't just a word anymore. It was real. For the first time in generations, humanity looked up at the stars without fear. But even peace had its price. Ceremonies were held for the fallen, names were spoken, flags were lowered. At every station the fleet passed, People gathered to cheer, to cry, to salute the survivors. They cheered Elias, the commander who never gave up. But he never took the stage. Let others speak. His voice, for now, belonged only to her. When the Titan's vow reached Earth's orbit, Elias saw the planet from above and felt like a stranger. The blue seas, the white clouds, it looked unchanged, but he had changed. He carried the stars inside him now, the memory of alien worlds, of fire and love and sacrifice. A message waited for him from the Earth Council. They wanted to honor him, to give him titles, medals, his name carved into stone. He accepted only one request: a memorial for Soraya, not hidden in a lab or lost in dusty files, but placed in the open, in the center of Earth's largest space garden, where everyone could see her name and remember what she had done. He wrote the words himself. She crossed stars and time not, for war, but for love. And in doing so, she saved us all. People came from everywhere to see the memorial. They asked questions. Some cried. Some simply stood in silence. And in the quiet. Days that followed, stories began to spread. Not just reports from commanders, but real stories about the alien woman who walked calmly through fire, who healed wounded machines with a touch, who smiled at children and stood by her husband in the heart of battle. Some called her a guardian. Others called her a goddess. But Elias knew the truth. She was just Soraya, brave, gentle, strong, and deeply human. In ways that had nothing to do with blood or origin, Elias stayed away from command for a while after that. He visited the outer colonies, helped rebuild what was broken. He worked with diplomats, helped form the first human-allied council to connect scattered species across the stars. New friendships grew from old fears. Former enemies sent peace gifts. Survivors from planets once ruled by the Zarquan came forward with their own stories. Some even spoke of Soraya as a myth passed down by their ancestors. A silver-haired woman of light who had promised to return. Elias smiled when he heard. Those stories, maybe some truths, were too big to die. One evening, while walking under the twin suns of a small farming colony on Damaris IV, Elias looked up and thought he saw a shape in the sky, a flicker of silver and blue, like wings made of starlight. It vanished in seconds, but he didn't feel surprised. He felt peace. In his heart, he knew what Soraya had once said was true. Love didn't die with time. It waited. It returned. It found its way across galaxies. He whispered her name into the wind, and for a moment, he swore the leaves danced in response. Years passed. The galaxy changed. War gave way to growth. The Titan's vow became a symbol of hope, now resting in orbit above Earth as a museum and memorial. Children toured its halls, learning about the war, about Elias, and always about Soraya. Her story lived on, not as a tale of death, but of life. Of love that refused to end, of two souls drawn together no matter the cost. Elias grew older, his hair turning silver like hers once was. But he never remarried. His heart had already made its choice. And every night, before he closed his eyes, he would sit under the stars and tell her about the day. He would say, "We're still here. Soraya, we're still trying. Just like you'd want." Somewhere, maybe just beyond the edge of time, her light still listened.